This is Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we're joined by Dan Dow. He is the DA in San Luis Obispo County. And sir, I can't believe we have to discuss this issue in San Luis Obispo in California or in the United States. And the issue is human trafficking, which means what?
Well, it basically means modern-day slavery. It's taking someone against their will and putting them into service, doing something compulsory, not paying them a valid wage if it's in the area of labor.
Sure.
But unfortunately, the real underbelly right now is the area of sex human trafficking. And right here in beautiful San Luis Obispo County, we've had 3 cases in recent history, including one just a week or 2 ago, involving minors as young as 15 years old being trafficked into our county for purposes of sex.
And here's what's stunning about this. These are not young women who are immigrants to this country.
Correct.
These are Americans.
In fact, we're finding that typically across the state and our country, the victims typically are from the ages of 12 to 15 when they're pulled into it, oftentimes from vulnerable situations, but they're typically American U.S. citizens.
What's happened? How is this happening? Are they runaways? Are they middle school or high school dropouts? Are they addicts? And I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but I'm just trying to figure out what's happening.
Sure. Well, there are clearly issues typically at home that need to be addressed that cause someone to be vulnerable. But we're finding that the recruitment effort is actually happening in the schools where other minors often are involved already. They're being trained by their pimps, by the people that are pushing them to groom and find young people who are vulnerable, who might need a friend to lean on, who might be susceptible to wanting some of the latest in clothing and latest in other things as enticements.
And here's what's remarkable about the case your office recently filed. I believe there are, is it 3 defendants?
4, 3 adults and 1 juvenile.
And that's where I'm going. One of the defendants is a juvenile.
That's right.
One of the defendants is just a year older than the victim. And I'm nervous to ask, but I think I know the answer. Was that defendant the one that recruited her into the situation?
According to what's been released publicly and put in the press, yes, that's what's being reported now, and that clearly this young man was instrumental in...
That's the allegation.
That's the allegation.
Right. Now, who is this girl? Again, I know we can't say her name, or that's policy not to say her name, but tell us about her just as an example of who these victims are.
Well, let me just kind of step back and say generally that without specifically on the facts of this case, that a young person who has some kind of a draw to a person who essentially might want to date that person is susceptible to being manipulated and said, hey, I want to go spend some time with this person and perhaps leave town and go with them on a trip, and then not suspecting it, being told that, hey, because we provided something for you, you've got to provide something back for us.
So in these types of situations, I'm wondering, again, these are generalizations, but for the last 3 cases, to the extent you can say, are they local girls, or are they girls that came up the 101 because we're on our way to San Francisco coming from LA or on the way back?
They're typically not necessarily being recruited in San Luis Obispo County. The ones that I'm aware of that I've been involved in have involved young people from other places. I'll give you an example that happened in Fresno. The case has now been completed by the U.S. Attorney, but it ended up 2 young 15-year-old women were here in our city, and they were being forced into sex acts. They had been kidnapped essentially by 2 gang members in Fresno. They were members of a Fresno Bulldog gang. They had gone to the extreme of actually tattooing or marking with their names the monikers of the gang members on the young women to mark them as their property. They were being trafficked in numerous counties around the state before they arrived here. Fortunately, one was able to get free.
That's what I was wondering. How do you get that? How do you find that girl and this woman?
What's happened in the cases I'm familiar with is one of them has been able to get free, make contact with a family member in their home county. That family member calls law enforcement there, and then law enforcement calls our local law enforcement, who can go in and utilize our protocol and free those young people. And I want to say in January, it was Human Trafficking Month in California.
It is every January.
Every January, we were able to start a task force. We'd already been working on it for several months. A law enforcement task force. It's basically to have a collaborative effort between law enforcement and the district attorney's office to ensure that when a case arises, they're not just going to look at it the way that they used to and say this is a prostitution case,
right,
and the victim is really a defendant.
And I was going to ask you that. I know, for example, in Los Angeles County, your counterpart Jackie Lacey is trying to redefine victim/defendant. I mean, are they a victim or are they a defendant? What's happening here in San Luis Obispo County?
And Miss Lacey, Jackie Lacey, and I are on the same page in that
right,
regard. I think it's very critical. In fact, when I'm talking to the news media, I usually will remind them that this isn't a case of child prostitution; it's child exploitation.
Interesting.
And it's commercial sexual exploitation of a minor, of a child, and it needs to stop. And we need to start discussing what it really is, as apart from calling it prostitution.
So let me ask you, what are the signs that a child may be in a trafficking situation? Because it's not always that they're locked up, like the Ohio case, for example, where they're locked up for 10 years. They may go to school still, and then come home. I mean, they are in public at times. What are the signals?
I think one of the signals would be, for instance, if someone is at a hotel and they see frequent people coming to that hotel room, and you think, there's something going on there. It's not just a bunch of friends hanging out in a hotel room. Sometimes it might be that you're out and about, and the person seems to be very attached and submissive to the person that they're following. There are a number of different signs. What we've done is we've put out a human trafficking poster, which hopefully you can show the viewers.
I'm going to hold this up, John. So this is what we're dealing with here. And this is a statewide effort.
It is. In fact, there was a Senate bill that was passed a couple of years ago that required certain businesses to post a poster that had this wording in it. And so this is our program here locally. We have a hotline that they can call if people spot it or are concerned about it. In addition, victims can call that hotline. In fact, we've had victims call that number and be routed to their local law enforcement area that covers the jurisdiction where the victim was located. We've received tips as well from calls to that national hotline locally. Just in the last month, we've had several tips to our Crime Stoppers about suspected human trafficking, and that starts the investigation process. A lot of times these cases are hard to prove.
I understand. What about the labor situations? Because really trafficking kind of entered the vernacular with a lot of cases in Southern California. There was the El Monte case. I remember there was I think a recent anniversary, call it an anniversary of the El Monte case, where these women, I think from Thailand, were being held. And it was not a sex trafficking, it was labor trafficking. Is that an issue? I mean, I think about ag in this area. I mean, could that be an issue here?
Absolutely, it is. And that's a big part of our effort as well, is to make sure that law enforcement is looking for those cases. We're an agricultural county. We have a lot of field workers. And certainly there is a concern that there could be labor trafficking in that area as well. And our law enforcement agencies, the Sheriff's Department, are looking for that. Their rural crime deputies are always keeping an eye out, looking for that. Again, it's harder to find because if the victims are reluctant to report. Because they're worried that they're going to be deported, that sort of thing, if they come out and report that they're a victim.
And so what are you doing about that very question of immigration status? A lot of talks about sanctuary cities, which is off this a bit, but still plays into the conversation.
Well, we've just recently had a case where a person that's an undocumented immigrant was arrested in Paso Robles and booked on felony child abuse, and he was able to post a bond. And in fact, it was just in the news yesterday where ICE had asked for him to be detained, but he was able to post a bond. And so, as you probably know, there was a case in Oregon. A federal district judge ruled that the local sheriff was liable for holding this undocumented immigrant and liable civilly for financial lawsuit. It's a very complicated issue. There was another Court of Appeals case out of Pennsylvania as well last year.
Will you come back and talk about this?
Sure.
We could talk forever, but his name is Dan Dow. He is the DA for San Luis Obispo County. My name is Brad Pomerance. You're watching Charter Local Edition.